I would like to call the school board meeting for June 4th, 2019 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Mr. Barron, Ms. Bradley,
Here.
Ms. Langford,
Here.
Ms. Ellsbernd,
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Here.
Caldwell Johnson, Ms. Anderson.
Here. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. We do need to amend the agenda to comply with our board governance process policy 1.67D, which entails moving item D11 from consent to other. So may I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda with this amendment?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Ms. Langford, second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next on our agenda is approval of minutes for May 21, 2019. May I have a motion and a second to approve May 21, 2019 minutes?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Delagardelle, second by Ms. Bradley. Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next on our agenda is approval of minutes for May 31, 2019. May I have a motion and a second to approve May 31, 2019 minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Barron, second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote. Deanna, you need to abstain. You weren't at May 31 meeting on Friday.
Oh.
Motion passes 5-0 with one abstaining. Do we have no district recognitions tonight? So next item on the agenda is consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information desk to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board in public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Langford, do you have the motion?
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $7,896,079.10.
Is there a second?
Madam Chair, point of clarification. Did we pull item
D11.
11 or D10?
D10.
Because I think we may have made the motion to pull item D11, and I think we may have meant
That's
to
what we
pull
did.
item
D11,
D10.
Des Moines Education
No,
Association.
we need, we do, yeah. And then,
That is the item that we pulled, was Des Moines Education Association to comply with our board conflict of interest policy.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so do we have a second? If so, I missed it.
Second.
Thank you.
for the consent.
We do have speakers, Valerie Cohen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I stand here tonight as a parent, a taxpayer, and a voter who happens to presently be employed by this district. I say presently because if the new contract for AFSCME goes through, I fully expect someone will be putting my head on the chopping block for having the audacity to speak to you tonight or to speak ever. You see, despite your resolution passed October 2nd, 2018, that spoke to the board's recognition of the need for worker respect and true contract negotiation in the face of the gutted Chapter 20. The negotiators that allegedly are working for your interests under your superintendent opened with the district proposes removing these unless agreed as we propose. That's not negotiation, that's dictation. There's now a piece in that new proposed contract that offers non-disciplinary termination. Not if you fail probation, but if you're an employee of tenure and you're just not working out. Non-disciplinary termination with 60 days notice. As a parent and as a taxpayer, I stand before you with the firm conviction that examples start at the top. Culture starts at the top. Climate starts at the top. When the very employees that provide all of the nitty-gritty to the district's children are being continually treated with disrespect by the district's managers, how can you expect these employees to be at their own personal best? It's a simple fact that titans of industry all know that employers who make their employees feel the love have employees that are best equipped to do and be their very best and give their very best. From district managers, I'm not feeling the love. From district HR, I'm not feeling the love. Who worked on the district's negotiating team? I'm not feeling the love. Within this district, it has become a frequent trope. We're asking everyone to do more with less. It's times like these that it's imperative that managers learn how to make their employees feel the love. HR needs to be an accessible, warm and fuzzy side, authentically. From the very top, I implore, I beseech, I beg and I challenge you to create and cultivate a culture and climate of loving respect that runs full permeation from the board and its superintendent, through the HR, through the directors, through the managers, through the administrators, and down to the very bottom of every district trash can, every employee and hand in between. When you are always asking people to do more with less, it is essential that they, the employees doing so very much, feel the love. If you, the board with whom the buck stops, leave the operations contract as it is being sent to you now, I'm almost certain that I will be gone in no time for having the audacity to stand up for workers' rights and stand up for the district environment that says what it does and does what it says. I am a good and dedicated worker with a demonstrated deep concern and commitment to our district students. This year, I have purchased gloves, hats, laundry detergent, shoes, and alarm clocks for district children. Do you really feel that employees' voices should be silenced? Do you really believe that employees should be able to be dismissed, non-discipline? Do you really believe that employees should be inhibited from reaching out and speaking up about their feelings and what they see? Secrets are not healthy, in my estimation. And while management does not often appreciate hearing from us, we are valuable and we are people with rights and feelings that deserve respect, and nothing good will thrive in the dark. If this new chunk of language remains, if you allow it to remain, you're saying you're okay with our voices being silenced. And you're sure you know about everything that's going on in the district, so our lips should be administratively and bureaucratically stapled. I ask that you, as a board, send your negotiation team back to the table with the directive to strike out the non-disciplinary termination. Strike that out from the operations contract. Allow a multi-year contract with an annual wage opener like the other contracts have. And show us the love. Let us feel the love so that we can be at our very best to give the love to the district's kids, no different than any other group. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Bobby Spear.
Hi, I'm Bobby Spear. I live at 2338 East 14th Street here in Des Moines. Valerie said a lot of stuff that I feel. But the last two times that I came and spoke to you guys, I spoke to you guys on the treatment of employees. Well, now we're at negotiations, and the treatment of employees is basically still right in our face, without a Gallup poll, without any survey. You can look at the contract, you can look at the ones that were handed to you throughout the negotiation period and see how things were written, how things were said, and see where we're coming from. But the last couple times that I did spoke, I felt like I burned a bridge that I've had for about 12 years. And it did kind of bother me. Because it was how do I say it? I try to write and then I don't follow it anyways, excuse me. But it was kind of a confidant type of thing, and I felt like it was broken because I came here and spoke to everyone about the treatment of employees. And I mean, I was here twice and spoke to all of you. And it's been a rough year on management, on transportation, which trickled into other departments. So I'm not saying it's been an easy year for anyone. But when you single out one group of people, the way that people have been singled out, that is not a good way of treating employees. And I was always told Des Moines is the biggest school district in the state of Iowa. We're the leaders. You guys know we're not. We have work to do in the entire district. We have good education in this district. I had 4 kids graduate from here, and I wouldn't change it for nothing. They had opportunities in the central campus programs and everything. But if I would have known that working for a school district was going to be this hard, I would have stayed up for mayor. Because I'm to the point now that sometimes I don't even want to tell people where I work, because then they ask me how the environment is, and I don't want to answer the question because I'm embarrassed on how employees talk about management, on how management treats us, and how each union is treated differently. And the bottom line is we're all people trying to raise our families and have a good time and just live life in the circle we're supposed to. And the stuff in this contract is just wrong. I've worked a dual assignment all year, but I've been trained to do both jobs. Not everybody's trained to do all the jobs in this district. I can't go spray weeds. Weeds. I can't go clean a pool. I can't add the chemicals. So dual assignment is an important thing. So just please look on how this has changed and hold off on your decision on this contract, because the attack of it was wrong. We were hoping for a multi-year. I mean, I really don't know how to say too much without acting like I'm trying to negotiate with the board, because that is not my intent. But I just want you guys to know that I disagree with the way things were handled this year, and I've been in several negotiations, and I was appalled. It's the worst I've ever seen. I feel we can work together if both sides come together. But it's been obvious that there's a few people on both sides that are causing roadblocks for some reason, and I don't know why. Thank you.
Thank you. Board, is there any discussion? Ms. Anderson?
Yeah, actually, let's see.
It was already on, Heather, now it's off.
Okay, earlier, I think today, Tom, there was an option. So the agreement is for option one, but earlier on,
with all union members who are voting on a contract for the first time after the changes to Chapter 20, which is, it's not technically the case because we did extend the contract prior to the last one expiring, but it's the first time when, since the pre-negotiated agreement had, prior to it expiring, this is the first time that we've had an actual new contract under the new language. And we wanted to make sure, and PERB recommended this, that we state what the outcome would be if the contract was not ratified and it went to arbitration. Because once it goes to arbitration under the new rules, the district really doesn't have anything to say about it. The bargaining unit doesn't have anything to say about it. They just have basically a set of rules. So the permissive language would automatically be out, as would any weighing in on what base wage increase would be. So it also said in that language 1.4% increase in base wage because it's set by a formula. That amount is now down to, as I understand it, 1.3, and the further we go into the summer, it looks like it's going to continue to go down. So that was a point of clarification to make sure that people were making an informed decision when they voted, and it was a recommendation by PERB. But that's the PERB is the Public Employee Relations Board.
but that was only brought up at the end, not the beginning of negotiation.
Yeah, our intent was never to remove the permissive language. We bargain, and you can tell from the agreement that we obviously did bargain the permissive language because there's
Right.
all the permissive articles are still in the contract. There are a number of modifications to the contract that were brought to the bargaining table by the bargaining unit that were agreed to by the district. They're really the only two changes that the district wanted. One was the dual assignment, and the other was some changes in the discipline and discharge language. We didn't get exactly what we thought was the best language, but we got a modification from what the current unsupportable language is, which puts us in a position of really not being able to perform required management functions in a way that doesn't put the district in liability.
I have one more question. The dual assignment then, so my understanding is this means, let's say you're a bus driver and you have the opportunity to work in a kitchen or something, or maybe I'm
Yeah,
doing
so
reverse,
there were some comments made earlier that, we're not going to put assign somebody to an assignment for which they are not qualified or for which they do not have proper training. We're not going to ask a food service worker to go chemically treat our swimming pools or spray our lawns. But we do have, we've had a shortage, as everybody is well aware, and we're not the only district to have this shortage in bus drivers in particular. That's our most acute need. We have AFSCME covered unit employees who drive for us but don't drive buses. We would like to be able to allow them to also drive a bus, which would allow them to get more hours. In some cases, folks would then get enough hours that they would qualify for benefits. There are a number of other examples too, too many to mention, but that's what, right now, we're prohibited from doing that, and it's hurting both employees and the district.
And I'm sorry, is this a choice? So like I work in the kitchen and I get off at, before school's out. Do I get to go home, or am I told?
Yes.
I need to now drive a bus?
You get to go home.
Right, but if I want to, I can drive a bus.
If there's a position open and you have the appropriate certification.
It is voluntary.
Yeah, I mean, we can't force people to do things that they
Right.
that they don't want to do.
Is that everything?
Go ahead.
Ms. Langford?
Hello? Great. Superintendent, could you, some clarification in response to some of the comments we heard today, the amendment that was made to the contract and termination without cause upon 60 calendar day notice to state as follows: an employee may be terminated without cause upon 60 calendar days notice. Such termination shall not be considered disciplinary in nature and shall not be subject to grievance procedures. During that 60 calendar day period, the employee may be required to continue to work for the district and or may be placed on administrative leave as determined in the district's sole discretion. Can you talk me through what that really means in the public, what that really means?
Yeah, and I may ask Aaron Hilligus to come up here and walk through the finer points of that, but essentially
Made that decision as a district.
The problem that we're trying to solve is that right now, under the current contract, if someone is recommended for termination for cause, they can appeal that or grieve it, essentially, and ultimately go to arbitration. When it gets to arbitration, it goes to PERB, and an administrative law judge makes a ruling on it. And both sides have to live by that ruling. So we can have someone who, and this has happened multiple times, where we terminate someone for cause, like abusing a child, for instance, and the administrative law judge overturns it. So then we have to put that person back into our employ, causing tremendous liability to the district because we're knowingly employing someone that has a record of, in this case, in this example, abuse of a child. And then if that happens again, we're tremendously liable. The district is tremendously liable because we're knowingly putting a child in harm's way.
Sure. That I understand. I know we've had those conversations around the board table. This is from a completely outside perspective. Do you think that there could be unintended consequences of this policy and how it's used?
Yes, there could be unintended consequences. There are, I think, unintended consequences with the current policy. Certainly, when it comes to an employee group where we're struggling to retain employees, we're doing everything that we can to keep them. But in some instances, it's just not an appropriate option to keep someone employed. And since we were unable to negotiate the change that we would really like to see in that language, this was an avenue that would allow us to address the problem that I just described, which is really the rubbing point for the district.
Mm-hmm. With this, so I just want to be clear that I'm understanding the language correctly. So this is essentially saying any employee, well, no, we're looking specifically at the ASME contract, could be terminated without cause. When we walked through that, I heard something about probation, because I know in most jobs, right, there's documentation that has to happen throughout the process of an issue, and then, so is that all scratched in this case? A supervisor could essentially say, you're done, and the employee is not entitled to any sort of understanding?
Well, yeah, in theory, that could be the case, but it would be foolish for us to exercise that section of the contract, which requires us to pay somebody for 2 months for not working. We're not going to, all we're attempting to do is to not have the situation where we follow the entire process and then it gets out of our hands and it's overturned, and then we don't have any way to perform appropriate oversight and management of the district. Aaron, do you want to I don't know if you have a way to explain this more precisely or in a more meaningful way?
Good evening. So I guess the easiest explanation is going into the bargaining process itself and what happened. And the initial proposal was to have discipline removed from the grievance arbitration process, or actually from the arbitration. The step with that is, with a grievance, it's a violation of the contract, and when you have discipline and discharge contained in a contract, then so long as there is not an exception contained within a grievance arbitration clause, any sort of those violations could be subject to arbitration. And so given some of the prior experiences that the district has had, the proposal was to remove discipline from arbitration. And this is the only bargaining unit that has that sort of provision in there. So there aren't other groups that have these sort of protections of taking something to arbitration, discipline to arbitration. So as part of the bargaining process, the give and take process, trying to come to an agreement, there was an alternative approach that was taken at the bargaining table. And that approach was to create this removal without cause provision. It doesn't take out, in a way, it's almost could be viewed as a two-tier approach. If an employee is terminated, they still have the right under the contract to challenge the termination under the grievance arbitration clause. They could continue to proceed to arbitration under that. But if the district, due to some, given certain facts that may accrue or student safety issues or things like that, there may need to be a determination that this is just not in the best interest of the district or the students to maintain that employee here. And then that provision would be able to kick in and they would be able to be removed with the 60 days notice. And then in terms of the 60 days notice, what that would effectively be in that context most likely would be a payment of a 60-day severance. And what the goal of coming up with the provision of this was the AFSCME bargaining unit had something that no other group, no other bargaining unit had with respect to the provisions for discharge. And so what the goal here was to have create some sort of notice mechanism, something similar to what teachers may have. So you provide a notice, and I believe the district's initial offer with respect to this was a 30-day sort of advance notice provision. And then it was increased, and with respect to the final offer, the one that was ratified by the AFSCME membership was 60 days advance notice there. And so you could see it play out in a couple different senses under this without cause provision. An employee could be assigned to continue performing their role for 60 days. You provide advance notice of that. It could pertain to, I said hypothetically, maybe a layoff situation, but that's not what it's necessarily geared towards. But someone could be provided advance notice of the 60 days and continue working in that context. And then the other one is that things aren't working out. There's a safety issue. And if it's something that's particularly egregious, we can't have you here any longer. We're going to pay you 60 days to separate under this contractual provision. So it was a way to go, as part of the give and take process with bargaining, it was a way to, I believe, be quite generous in terms of offering the amount with respect to a severance. Almost everywhere else is an at will in a context. I mean, that is the private sector, but everyone is not fired. The other bargaining unit employees who do not have this discharge language in their contract, they're not readily fired. I know one thing with respect to that, I did hear concerns that because speaking out, I fear I'm going to get fired for that. I'm not dismissing the fear, but there are avenues there. If someone is getting fired for speaking out about, say, labor relations issues here, there's an administrative body, the Public Employment Relations Board, to deal with something like that. And so there are these legal protections that continue to remain there. It just was a way to, when AFSCME adamantly said that, no, we cannot remove this discipline from the arbitration clause as part of the bargaining process, under the law, the district could have said, well, no, we're going to take it out. We're not going to bargain over that. We're just going to take it out. But based on the marching orders with everything, that was not the approach. What we took was an approach to bargain. And when you bargain doesn't mean you always necessarily agree, but we firmly believe we offer them the best contract possible, keeping in mind the priorities that were necessary in that disciplinary context.
Thank you.
So sorry, Madam.
Go ahead.
What did, prior to this amendment, what did it look like for employees?
Well, prior to this amendment, discipline was still a permissive subject of bargaining.
True. Okay.
So it really was not different. Prior to the change in law, the district could have said, nope, we don't want this in the contract. It could be removed. The district could have done that too. But there's a labor relations dynamic of, you know, it was a decision made not to do that.
I'm sorry, I mean, granted, recognizing that the law has changed and the district undeniably has complete power in a bargaining situation. I mean, when it was a permissible item to be bargained with the amendment itself, what did the process look like for an employee? If this,
So what does it presently, how does it presently work?
yes, thank you.
In terms of the bargaining process or the discipline process?
In terms of the discipline process, in terms of,
It would have been exactly the same. That the teacher disciplinary process was changed somewhat under the law, but
I think what she's asking is, in the current version of the AFSCME contract, how does the discipline and discharge language operationally function?
okay, so not the language that was negotiated now, but the language previously. So what would happen is disciplined, union representative files a grievance. The grievance advances through the steps of the grievance process. It can be adjusted at those various steps. And then one of those steps, which is the final step, is arbitration. Generally referred to, you might hear two different things. There's grievance arbitration and interest arbitration. Grievance arbitration is that mechanism that would be in place to resolve the disciplinary matter. And so in that context, you would go to a hearing that's kind of like a court-light hearing. They take evidence and you'll have witnesses and present a case, and then the arbitrator would render a decision. And so that's the step that applies there. That's the step that also applies under the negotiated language. But what was initially proposed was taking discipline out from that. However, the district backed off of taking it out from that after they received resistance from AFSCME. And so the alternative approach was to continue to have that there. But then here's this other thing. If it is drastic enough to where the district has determined it needs to pay, you do a 60-day severance pay, effectively, then there would be that opportunity there. So the process under the grievance arbitration mechanism remains, it's effectively identical. There was the parties through negotiations, and this was I wish negotiations would have played out the way it did when the parties were collaboratively working together to try and develop the grievance process itself. The grievance process itself had several hiccups. It was a long process. There were a lot of, I think, unnecessary steps there. And so the parties got together and worked very collaboratively and well together on that to try and create a more streamlined, transparent, and effective process. And so while I say it's effectively the same as it was before, I just want to be entirely accurate on that. But so there are a few changes in the steps, but arbitration remains as is.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions related to that?
Not for,
Okay. Anybody else questions for?
I do. So you said it was identical, and then so the grievance process, and then they go through a grievance arbitration. Who's the arbitrator? You said, it's kind of like a judge. I mean,
It's kind of like a judge. There's a panel.
that
you can
sounds like
request.
it's not a judge then. Like,
Well, you can request a panel from PERB. There are all different bodies throughout, and I've never done arbitration over here, but I believe it's a panel with Iowa PERB that is requested, and then the parties will alternatively strike. Generally, there are two different. That in my prior practice before I moved over here to Iowa, there would be the American Arbitration Association and the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. PERB operates effectively the same way. They will provide a panel, just a list of names, and then the parties will, I don't know if this is in the contract, how it's determined. I'd have to look at that. But frequently it'll be a coin toss that will determine who will go first in terms of striking the name. And then you'll alternate, strike one, other side will strike another one, until you end up with one name left. And the purpose of that is, conceptually, the union would strike the most management-friendly arbitrators. Management would strike the most labor-friendly arbitrators. That's historically how it is, and then you find someone in the middle that would be the ultimate decision maker. So that's just the process itself. I can't tell you if that's specifically how it's been done here with the district because I have not represented y'all in that capacity.
And I'm just a little confused because if it's identical, why are we replacing it? It's not identical.
No,
I mean,
that's what I was saying. It's not identical.
Okay.
The disciplinary process.
Okay.
No, the disciplinary process being subject to arbitration, that whole mechanism is identical. There was a streamlining of the grievance process. There was an elimination of a few steps. There was the establishment of a specific mediation step to try and help facilitate. The goal in both parties was to try and make something that was efficient and effective for both parties, because my understanding is the current mechanism doesn't work for either.
So, and this isn't probably for you. Tom, like, I know that you've talked about prior experiences. I get that sometimes, you know, when they go before a judge, we don't win. But isn't that due process? I mean, are we taking away, I feel like we're taking away their rights, their right to.
As Aaron stated earlier, it would be difficult to find a contract anywhere in the state, and well beyond the state, that has this particular language in it. So this particular language would be removing that currently existing right. However, it doesn't mean that due process goes away. There are many other legal avenues that Aaron can describe for us, or Miriam, or a number of other folks. But if you look at all the rest of our negotiated agreements, there's nothing like this language in any of them.
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify. There's nothing else like this new language in any of the other contracts? So there's nothing like...
Or the old language.
Okay.
The issue for the district is the discipline and discharge language as it currently exists in the AFSCME contract. And so our wish would have been just to remove it, and understandably, AFSCME did not want to remove it, so we went through a negotiations process and arrived at something in the middle that neither one of us are happy with.
And that's the new language?
Yes.
Because you would have been happy just getting rid of it completely, and then, is that right? Or,
Yes.
okay.
Mr. Barron?
So, one real quick clarification, because I think we've asked the same question about 7 different times, and yet I'm still confused, and that's me. So employees under the new agreement would or would not have the ability to take a discharge to PERB. Are there basically two avenues to discharge an employee, either the newly added
Yes.
without cause 60 days,
Yes.
or you follow the existing process right now, in which the employee has the opportunity to grieve it, take it to an ALJ, and have a decision
Right.
that would be binding on both parties.
Right.
And the difference being that the district, when would the district, with cause and without cause, I guess is what's catching me up. So what I'm coming back to here is, what we heard from the two people that addressed the board, and it's a consistent theme, I think, of a lack of trust, and allegiance, I think, to what we're all trying to do here. I agree with Bobby that there's problems within this district, but I'm here right now at some cost to my marriage. I'm okay, but it was just hard to get out the door tonight with a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. But I'm here because I think that there's something there. I think there's something that we can be proud of. And so what what I'm concerned with, we're faced with contracts that were negotiated and ratified by the bargaining units. I see no reason for me to oppose those contracts, and I intend to support them. But what I want to do with my time here is really make sure, because I have trust that you and your chiefs are trying to repair some bonds, and I think Bill was effective tremendously.
And those efforts are continuing, just by the way.
And I think that there's more there. I guess with the new discharge proposal, or the new option, we right now having this conversation with you as a board and having the open question of whether we approve the contract or not. Are we to understand this is not something that the district intends to use frequently?
Yes, we don't intend to use it frequently. What we're trying to address is what becomes an impossibility of performance when we do make a termination for good cause, and these terminations do not happen frequently. But when they get grieved and then ultimately adjudicated by an ALJ, we are sometimes left in a position where it's literally a lose-lose for the district. And that seems to be something that is not wise to continue.
And that's not lost on me, and I don't want that either. I don't want to go to parents and justify, someone that shouldn't be in a classroom or around kids still being there. And I think that's all of this ultimately comes back on us, whether it's the aspect that the district's worried about or the aspect that the employees are bringing to us, which is also very valid. And
sure.
And so the point I'm trying to get across is that, I, as a board member, put a lot of trust in you and have a lot of faith in you in this role, and faith in you to exercise, as the chief executive of this body, to exercise, this provision only when necessary. And I don't think it's in either side's benefit. We don't want to be a district that's hard to work for.
No, we don't. We absolutely do not.
But we've got some room we got some ground to make up in that respect. And I think
agree.
What I want folks to be aware of too is that this is a topic of conversation that the board has had for some months now, and I think it's obviously something that we're especially concerned with. And so,
sure.
I trust the two employees that came up and spoke here. They've been very, I think, passionate and effective, and I think honest representatives of our district, and so it's no small thing to hear what they had to say today. And so I hope that that this continues to be an area of improvement for our management going forward.
I agree, and it will be.
Thank you, Rob.
Go ahead.
I'm struggling with this for a couple reasons. One is I think that if we took the contract completely out of context of our situation, I don't think there would be a problem with it. Also, as a union member and someone who votes on ratification of a contract on every time negotiations happen, I think I would be frustrated if my vote didn't matter at the board table, like that ratification didn't matter. But I think given the context of where we're at, I think I have a healthy skepticism of how this new contract language in terms of termination without cause might actually be enacted. And I think that's where our employees are as well, that there's some healthy skepticism and lack of trust in that. And so I think for me, this comes back to our treatment of employees and how we're going to monitor that. And that's an ongoing conversation that I think later in the work plan, I would like to talk more about how do we move that to the top of our to-do list for the summer, because I don't think we have a lot of trust as a board that we're getting all the information that we need. And I don't know if you always have the guidance that you understand what we want. And so I think that conversation has to happen. Ultimately for me though, these contracts, like Rob said, were ratified by the bargaining unit. And so I'm having some tug and pull there on my judgment as someone outside of that situation and so that's where my struggle is. And that's where I'm at, I guess.
Yeah, she's your staff member.
Yeah.
I feel some type of ownership in what you just said, in building trust with employees. And I think.
Could you please introduce yourself just for the record and for everyone?
Sure, everybody.
out here?
Hello to
Thank
the
you.
cameras and everybody. My name is Lily Alvarado. I was just brought into the district 3 weeks ago as the new chief HR officer. And while I didn't participate in the negotiation, I do want to make sure that what you just mentioned, board member, which is a very critical piece as to why I'm here. And I want to make it known as a fact that what another board member mentioned in terms of knowing that we're trying to do the right things, knowing that we're not perfect and there's much work to be done, we all agree with that. And I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for that acknowledgement of wanting to build the next chapter in the district. I also think that the language in the contract, which is the language in other contracts within the district, right? So we're not asking for anything out of the ordinary, not only for our district in the way of negotiating union language, but also in the context of the whole state, even if we go farther out that way. But I do believe that a year contract is actually, if you think about it, an opportunity for them to come back in a year from now and hold us even more accountable then that they can hold us accountable now. Because we would have a whole year term for us to prove to them that there is no harm in the language. In the same token, they may have facts, knock on wood, that we would have to keep it in a year from now. So all I'm trying to say is it perfect? No. I think like the superintendent said, is either party happy with where we're at? No. But the fact that it's a one-year contract actually allows both parties to prove each other right or to prove each other with an opportunity in a year from now. So while it may not be feasible today, because we're not talking factually, both sides are talking with hypotheses, I think the hypothesis can be proven in a year from now with facts and validation and building trust. That's all I wanted to say. We're building a new chapter. I'm just here 3 weeks. I just want to let you know that I'm willing to stand with that decision and put, my duty on the line with making sure that these people are not mistreated. And I know what it's like to be mistreated as well. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Lilia.
Thank you.
Just in regards to what Kirsten mentioned around, and what we talked about around treatment of employees, just to remind the board that we did just, again, change that policy, was it last meeting?
Last meeting, yeah.
Right, and so as far as how we monitor that, there is a lot of different language in there as well that I think, I just wanted to remind everybody of that. Is there any other questions?
I do too.
Ms. Langford.
I recognize what I've learned during my time as the board. I recognize that the bargaining has taken place between those units, and you all have bargained, and I will also respect that process. However, I think that there could definitely be some very unintended consequences from this policy. Mm-hmm. And I'm not quite sure, and this is just my individual opinion, of what you're trying to prevent, if what damage is actually greater, and the probability of how many teachers we might find ourselves in that position, where we have an employee who has gone to arbitration and then is put back in the district, that could be a real harm to children, versus the ways that this policy could potentially be abused. But I think that in terms of our monitoring, I think back to bell times, mm-hmm. right? We said that we were going to monitor bell times, and we actually haven't really, and this is more to like my colleagues as the board, we actually haven't really monitored that, because that's not a superintendent thing, we haven't demanded that. So if we're going to talk about our monitoring process, I think we would actually have to hold ourselves accountable to figure out what that would look like.
I would just offer that I've given many updates of the metrics that I said I would share with the board regularly throughout the year on the start time metrics. So I would disagree that you haven't monitored.
And I'm going to interrupt just one more time too,
Absolutely.
Because this is a management limitation policy, treatment of employees, where we do have it calendared to receive, to monitor that. So it is already in our approved monitoring calendar.
Sure. I hear what you're saying. in thinking in terms of a monitoring report that the public has access to. We have gotten information,
Gotcha.
right? It's more about the public accountability and transparency piece for me that I think about when I think about monitoring in that space. So yes, Cindy, I hear that. And I hear that I have some hope and faith in the sense that we have some transitions and things that are happening internally. But I did just want to say it makes me uneasy.
Mm-hmm.
I do have another question. Earlier, when you were explaining, or when Rob kind of mentioned there were two different things that could happen, how do you decide, which thing will happen for the employee, or does the employee always have the right to, I don't know, like, do you one employee, like, you get a 60-day severance, and one employee you get the judge-like person? Sorry.
Oh, no problem. So to answer your question on that, it really, the typical lawyer answer, it depends. But I think where this would depend on a discussion with the union as well. I think the union would have a part in the process. The union would have a part in filing a grievance. There also are some potential repercussions of going through a just cause termination versus something that is, a discharge without cause, and say in terms of unemployment compensation and some other provisions of that nature. So there could be some scenarios. Let's say if it is an egregious student safety issue where there's a termination, the union would still have the right to make its determination on whether to file a grievance. And that would exist even if there was a determination on this without cause provision. Now, when that would come into play, I could go into a lot of hypotheticals. I don't know there on that. But I think where it was intended to come about dealt with the arbitration and arbitrator being a decision maker and making a decision that still impacted the safety of the children. And so instead of removing discharge from arbitration, it created a backstop that if you were confronted with that situation, that you were able to continue to protect instead of getting caught up hypothetically in, say, district court or something if you refuse to put an employee back to work.
So if a person is doing something that is harmful to children or employees, shouldn't they be held accountable rather than just letting them go? I mean, would the proper steps be taken, like you would call the authorities? And
well, you have different classes of employees. I mean, for one example, there's in the teaching profession.
But anyone who works with children.
Well, but there are licensure standards, but in the sense with the AFSCME bargaining unit, there's not the same licensing standards, professional obligations that say teachers are held to. And so there is a distinction there, whereas with certain conduct would be an automatic prohibition, potentially for life from teaching, there isn't that same sort of prohibition with respect to other what you generally refer to as blue-collar employees.
But what I'm saying is if you feel like you've harmed a child, we're not just going to let them go and they'll be on the streets and harm another child.
Well, there's another prohibition on passing things along. It's in terms of making the decision on what step to take. I can't answer that here. I mean, that would be the decision-making body, and it would be Lilia who spoke up here. There are those policy directives. Now, if we're reached out for legal advice related to it, we'd provide legal advice. But in terms of how it would apply, that's really not my call. But as the language is written, it could be applied in a couple different senses. It could be applied as simply a backstop to an arbitration if it's an arbitrator award that the district just cannot live with in terms of student safety issues. It could be something that is more upfront and expeditious, and but part of it will require working together, which for me is, the epitome of labor relations. Be working together with the union to discuss it. The union still has the right to file a grievance. And the union would not necessarily have to file a grievance if it felt like it was one that they would lose, but there's part of the discussion that needs to take place there, and that's something that will play out. And I don't think it's appropriate for me to state here how I think it's going to play out.
I don't want to set people, like, I guess if somebody does something really wrong, they should be held accountable, like, and be in front of a judge and have that. Yeah,
well, I deal with that frequently in situations, not only school. I represent a lot of police departments, and I encounter a lot of situations there. The problem sometimes with it is you need to get an individual out. And when you have certain mechanisms, sometimes it's safer to do the sure thing and make sure that they are not actually in the workplace if it's creating a significant safety issue.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just have one more, and I don't know that it's for you, but what would it look like if they went back to the drawing board on this item?
Well, here's what I can tell you. The district team went into this negotiations process in good faith. We followed board policy to a letter. In fact, one thing that hasn't been stated tonight is that in terms of wages, we did not attempt to do anything except give the bargaining unit what they asked for in their initial offering. If you read through article by article, there are a number of changes in the contract that were requests made by the bargaining unit that we honored, and the tentative agreement was reached at the bargaining table as we do every year or every cycle, and the bargaining unit voted on it and ratified it. So I've never encountered a situation where the governing body did not ratify the agreement that the bargaining unit had already ratified. I can tell you that as of June 30th, if we don't have this ratified, there will no longer be a contract. And what that looks like, especially considering that a recertification vote of this bargaining unit did not take place as it was supposed to last fall because of an administrative error on PERB's part, we're in kind of an undefined sort of no man's land right now. So not only has the bargaining unit not recertified as of June 30, if this isn't ratified, then we would be starting all over from scratch. So I guess I can't give you a concrete answer because I don't think anybody could.
Sorry, I have a comment on a different item on the consent agenda. Sure. I just wanted to raise up E9, the compensation for our ESPs, that there's a plan to move that to above $15 minimum wage over time, and I just didn't want that to get lost in this conversation because I feel like that's something we should be celebrating. As a progressive, I value continuing to work towards getting, I wish that we could do it more quickly, but I just wanted to raise that up as a big positive out of this because I didn't want that to get lost in our conversation tonight. So
thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Ms. Langford and a second by Mr. Barron. Please vote. Motion passes 5-1. Next, we have a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E1, public hearing for expansion of playground and parking lot at Cattell Elementary School? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
Yes, I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Bishop Engineering for an expansion to the playground and parking lot at Cattell Elementary School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Delgado, second by Mr. Barron. No presentation, any questions or discussion? Please vote. Vote is approved, 6-0. The next item on our agenda is item D11, Compensation Des Moines Education Association, Teachers and Certified Staff. This item was moved from the consent agenda to comply with Board Conflict of Interest Policy GP 167D, which requires that board members having a potential conflict of interest as described in the policy abstain from voting and recuse themselves from all discussions on the matter. Upon abstaining, the board member or members shall state the conflict and the reason for abstaining. So anyone needing to recuse themselves should do so accordingly at this time.
I'm going to be abstaining. My husband works as a teacher at Hoover. Although I don't completely agree, but it's a board policy. But that's something that we can maybe talk about at a different time.
Sure, just to give a little context, it is not by Iowa law that this would be a conflict of interest. It is a policy that the board has adopted in the past as a matter of additional transparency, just as we cannot take away from law, but we can always make policy stronger in our board governance policy, just like we did for the last item we just talked about in collective bargaining. So just to give the public a little context as to why that is, but absolutely correct that a proposal to change language on that policy or any other policy is welcome at any time.
I'm sorry, can I say one more thing? Yeah, because I really do think that I am capable of making a decision, and it's not based on my husband's salary, which is just basically the same as everyone else's. So eventually I'll talk to you about it. But
sure.
Tonight I won't. I'm abstaining.
Okay, so Dr. Ahart, do you have any context to give to this item?
We arrived at a multi-year agreement with the Teachers Association. If you recall, in 2016, when we were in the first year of a 2-year contract, we midway through that year, we extended the contract another year, just as we did with AFSCME that year. And so that extended their current contract through June 30 of 2019. This month, actually. Again, this is the first time that we've bargained, negotiated under the new rules of Chapter 20. We felt like, I think both sides felt like the contract was very strong and for the most part met the needs of both sides. So there were some very minor tweaking of language here and there. And we felt really comfortable, I think both sides, extending that for 3 years. And then the wages provision will be reopened next year and the following year under the same language negotiated in the tentative agreement that you see on your agenda tonight. In both cases, both with AFSCME and with both DMEA groups and with our crafts unit, new wages did exceed, in some cases pretty significantly, the supplemental state aid amount that we received from the state. I think that's a strong testament to the value that the district puts on its employees, knowing that we are in the people business. The vast bulk of our general fund is spent on people, as it should be, and we want to continue to keep our wages and working conditions competitive so that we can attract and retain the absolute best staff that we can.
Thank you. May I have a motion and a second to approve item D11?
I move approval.
Second.
Is there any discussion or any questions? Okay, please vote. Motion passes 5-0, one abstaining. Next on our agenda is item F1, open enrollment late applications for denial. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, per state code and district policy, we have a code mandated timeline for open enrollment applications. There are instances where we accept late applications, and then those late applications are weighed against the state code and district policy in terms of whether that appeal will be accepted. What's on your agenda under F1 are those that we've received since the last meeting that have been recommended for denial.
Thank you. May I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment late applications listed for item F1?
Second.
Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Okay, any discussion, or does anyone have any questions? We have a motion by Langford, second by Barron. Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next item on our agenda is item F2, open enrollment appeals for denial. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce this item?
Yeah, similar to the previous item, except that these are timely open enrollment applications that were denied and then have been appealed. The ones on your agenda this evening are those that did not make it through the appeal process and have been recommended for denial.
Thank you. May I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment appeals listed for F2?
Move approval.
Second.
Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Any discussion or questions? Okay, motion by Barron, second by Delagardelle. Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next item on our agenda is item F3, Iowa High School, or IHSAA and IGHSAU resolution. This is a discussion item which I will turn over to Dr. Ahart to introduce and give background.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of where to start. So in athletic competitions in the state of Iowa, schools compete against one another in classifications, and those classifications are determined by either the Boys Athletic Union, the IHSS or IHSAA, and in girls, the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union. So the only factor that determines what classification schools fall into is their enrollment. What isn't taken into account is absolutely every other factor. So what ends up happening is that inequities that exist, as early as before students are in school, continue to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. And when it gets to the high school level, where there's the largest number of interscholastic competitions, certain schools and certain school districts are at a disadvantage, a material disadvantage in terms of the number of students who are able to participate because of their personal circumstances. They're oftentimes students who would like to participate may not participate because they have responsibilities to their family and to their own health and well-being that prevents them from participating. We have students that participate and are only able to participate when that opportunity comes up in school, because they do not have the resources to participate in club teams at an earlier age level, or off-season when they are of age, because they just do not have the personal resources, the actually significant personal resources it takes to belong to a traveling team and pay all those fees and pay for travel and equipment and on and on and on and on. There are a number of other factors too. Students who are new to the country and don't have the background and experience in sports that are uniquely American, like football, for instance. And I could go on and on and on about these lists, but at any rate, if you look at the data, and I can send a tremendous amount of data to the board and the broader community. When you look at how that plays out across the state, what you'll see is that in every classification in the major sports, and those are the ones that we've looked the most at, the free and reduced price lunch percentage in the schools that win championships averages somewhere around 6 or 7%. It's very obvious that so that's one very clear pattern, and there are models in other states where especially socioeconomic status, and in some cases ELL status, figures into how schools are classified. So, for instance, if you take East High School or Lincoln High School. They're two of the biggest high schools in the state. However, if you attend a football game, for instance, between, pick a school in the suburbs, there's going to be a lot more players on the other school's team, not because the young men at East and Lincoln don't have a desire to compete or participate, but because they just have not had the opportunity and may presently not have the opportunity to participate. When it comes down to schools like North, which is much smaller than most of the other 4A schools, so they have a smaller student population to begin with, and then many fewer who are able to actually participate. In my mind, it becomes a serious ethical quandary that that I'm very uncomfortable with when I see 4 or 5 ambulances leaving a football game from Grubb Stadium when we're playing against a team that has, 6 or 7 or 8 times as many players on the other side, with fresh bodies coming in, and players who have played together for a very long time, have had a lot of opportunity that our young men just have not had. So what we're attempting to do, and so I've been working most closely with Joel Peterson, who is the superintendent in Cardinal of Eldon, a much smaller district, but a superintendent who is equity-minded and has seen in the smaller schools this same negative impact. What we're attempting to do is to motivate both of the athletic associations to take a serious look at how we classify schools for interscholastic competition and make some logical and common sense adjustments to how we classify schools, not so that schools that have a higher free and reduced price lunch percentage will win more games, although we do think that would be an outcome, but in order to provide an experience that is equitable with students who are in other schools that are more advantaged. What happens is, as we all know, as we've witnessed over time, and whether it's pros or college or high school, success breeds success. And a lack of success in terms of wins tends to be a killer for programs. And so it becomes more and more difficult to build a team and to provide the opportunity for our students to have the kind of experience that we want, to build teamwork, to build self-efficacy, to build mental discipline, obviously to have physical benefits that come with participating in athletics. So that's just a brief overview of why it is that we're attempting to pursue this. So our first big ask around the state is to shop a resolution very similar to this to as many districts as we can, to have their boards sign off on this and collectively put some pressure on these athletic unions to relook at how it is that we organize our activities so that all of the students across the state can have a legitimate opportunity to experience what we want all of our students to experience, not just in terms of wins, although that is not unimportant, but to have a safe experience that resembles other schools of similar sizes. It's very possible to do this where all schools can continue to participate. The schools that they will be competing against will look a little bit different. But we think that it would provide a much more level playing field, a safer opportunity, and certainly a much more equitable opportunity for all students. So,
Ms. Anderson?
I totally agree with that. For the last 4 years, I've been attending soccer games, and my kids all played soccer, and so hard to sit there and come against a team like Ankeny, Waukee. I just went to the Hoover Waukee semifinals, and I mean, it was exciting because the very first half, it was they hadn't scored until the very last few minutes of that first half. Waukee scored 1, but so it was 0-1, and I thought, wow, Hoover's, I mean, they're a good team, but Waukee had 28 players,
mm-hmm.
And Hoover had at least half, maybe. I don't know how many. And they just kept bringing them in and bringing them in, and they get a rest, and the poor, who were just couldn't do it because they were exhausted. It was hot, and and I've seen it where our kids don't have shoes to play. The coaches are raising money just to get them shoes. They're riding 2 or 3 buses to get to back home, and so sometimes they'll miss practices. Those other teams are doing those club sports, and it's year round, and they've been playing together since they were probably 2 or 3, and it's just not fair, and it's not fun to watch, and it is, it feels. I just want our kids to feel like they have a chance and to feel good about the skills that they have, because they're talented players. But losing and losing and losing and just getting beat down physically wears on them. And, we have coaches that are, throwing banquets for them, and, they don't have money to pay for it. So the coaches are paying for it out of their pocket. I mean, and it is admirable for our coaches, the coaches that invest in our students.
Absolutely.
Because I think that there's a lot there, and I've been wanting this to happen for a long time, and don't even get me started on the refs, but.
That's another important discussion that we need to have. But
thank you for that resolution.
Does anybody else have any questions or any concerns about the resolution?
I think that you might get some pushback from parents, even at the Hoover Roosevelt, let's just say, parents, and even I have friends that went to Lincoln, and they don't understand that our district has changed, and I don't necessarily think it's changed in a bad way. It's just, it is different, and we used to be the powerhouses, right? I didn't know Waukee was just this little we never played Waukee when I went to school, so they just don't understand that change. So like we could maybe some they need some education on it, I guess, as usual.
Yeah, and you bring up another point, if I may, real quickly, because I neglected to mention this. Private schools figure into this in a not insignificant way as well, because not only is there the size of the enrollment, but there's also the ability of a private school to draw students from well beyond the traditional boundaries that a school would have. And in fact, there was legislation approved in this past session that made it easier for students to drive further one way to school, so that more students would have the opportunity to take advantage of private school education. And so they have avenues to essentially recruit
they stole our quarterback.
to further stack the deck. And I'm certainly not arguing their right to do that, but what I do think is important is, I think Heather illustrated very well, is that our students are given an opportunity to show what it is that they can do in a context that's reasonable, and by any reasonable definition, a fair, level playing field.
I do. I would like to talk to you about this a little bit more, because I do feel like the players or the students need a little bit more support. Like when it's time for them to get physicals and stuff like that, sometimes they haven't communicated that with their parents, and you have to have a physical to play, and just if we could organize some ride shares to get.
So if we can have that conversation another time and stick to the resolution right now.
Sorry.
I have a question about the resolution.
Yes.
And this is what kind of conversation have you had with neighboring superintendents and their boards? I guess for me, I'm just wondering, like, if we take this up, we vote on it, what are the chances that we'll see action in the next 3 to 5 years on this actually happening? Does there seem to be widespread support, or?
We have a growing number of districts that are signing on to this. I'm not sure about all of the current UEN schools, but as I understand it, all but perhaps one are planning on passing a resolution. I haven't spoken directly with our immediate neighbors, but I know that they're aware of it. I will be having those conversations. They know these conversations are going on, but I haven't personally reached out to, to talk with the Ankenes and Waukees and West Des Moines. But I would be surprised if they would oppose it.
Okay, and that was really my question, was I think it will take support from some of those other large schools that we traditionally play against, which I think will just strengthen their competition. And if they have an undefeated season, right, it's against teams that are more equitable to them, and it's advantageous to everyone, I think.
Right.
So, yeah.
Ms. Langford?
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is very needed. And just from this space, I just want to acknowledge, and this is not, I think sometimes we talk about our district changing a lot. And I think sometimes there's an implied connotation underneath that language that our children are the problem. And I just want to be very clear coming from this space that that's not the case. Yes, our district is increasingly poor and working class and Black and brown, and filled with people from all over the world. And some of those changes in terms of socioeconomic status are structural issues that we need to rethink about how we address in our city, but our children are never the problem.
Exactly.
Right? And I just want to be very clear from this space that we say that.
Absolutely.
Of course, I didn't think that at all.
Oh, I know.
I know. Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, so then I believe this will appear on our next agenda for action. Done. Thank you. Next on our agenda is item F4, Board SMART Goals. This also is a discussion item. The starting point in creating these goals was community feedback from various listening sessions facilitated by Next Board, where input was requested regarding what student outcomes are important to our community. The sessions also included a prioritization process, and we worked with the feedback received over the course of multiple work sessions in the last several months in collaboration with staff and Next Board to create the 3 SMART goals, which are as follows. The percent of all 3rd grade students on track in reading will increase from 52% to 72% by June 2023, as measured by FAST. Number 2, the percent of Black male 3rd grade students on track in reading will increase from 35% to 72% by June 2023, as measured by FAST. And number 3, the percent of Black male students completing Algebra 1 with a B or higher by the end of grade 9 will increase from 17% to 35% by August 2023. The board will also develop a 4th goal focused on social emotional learning based on the proposed new management limitation 2.10 social emotional learning, which is the next item on the agenda, actually. So does the board have any questions or comments regarding these 3 goals? Yes.
I just want to raise up, I'm inferring, Tom, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in goal 3, when we're saying that we would like those young men to pass with a B or higher by August, I'm guessing that's probably including some summer school in there? Okay, because the others were just June, so thank you.
Yep. Exactly.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Thank you, everyone, for the hard work on this over the last months. This is going to be great to have in play and for us to be monitoring soon. These goals will appear also on the next agenda for action. All right, next on our agenda is item F5, Management Limitation 2.10, Social Emotional Learning, also a discussion item. This management limitation was developed in response to community listening sessions facilitated by Next Board. The policy is to ensure development of a plan by the district to address social emotional learning and needs of students. And once a plan is in place, the board will be able to develop those SEL outcome goals. The policy language is attached. I'm going to pull it up here myself. Does the board have any questions, comments, discussion regarding this item?
I'm very excited that we're putting this into our management limitations and having some conversations that are coming with policy and deliverables for our community around social and emotional learning. I feel like one of the major topics of conversation in our state has been mental health and has been how do we take care of that for kids. There have been a number of things happening in Polk County and the city to help support that, and I'm glad that the board and our community are overwhelmingly seeing that and that we're able to have some action for our community on that. So,
Agreed. Thank you. Ms. Langford?
And just to emphasize to our community that we listened to you, right? Like we took the feedback that you gave at all of the sessions that we hosted in the community, and we were really thoughtful about wanting to create goals and policies that aligned with that. So just know that when you came to those sessions, that feedback was taken and used by the board. So thank you.
Anything else? Again, thank you, everyone. This will appear on the next agenda for action. Next item is F6, quarterly board self-evaluation. The board lays out the means by which we agree to govern the district on behalf of the community and for the benefit of our students through our governance process policies and our board management delegation policies. The board self-monitors so that we fulfill this agreement, and according to Board Governance Policy 1.1, Governing Style and Values, Item 5, the board will allow no officer, individual, or committee of the board to hinder or be an excuse for not fulfilling its commitments. The board will monitor its process and performance for each meeting. Self-monitoring will include comparison of board activity and discipline to governance process and board management delegation policies. The board will discuss its process and performance quarterly. For this quarter, we looked at governance process policies 1.0 through 1.3. Again, that the results of the self-evaluation are attached to the agenda item, and I will open it up for board discussion regarding what was reported on the evaluation. If anybody wants to highlight anything, I know I have something, but I'll open it up to others first. Okay, I'm going to take your silence for an opportunity to jump in with what I want to say. One of the items that I had commented on was governance, GP 1.1, governing styles and values, and that is about, it's actually the policy I just read, and what I would like to consider and can bring forward as a formal proposal is that we add to that policy that the board will monitor its process and performance for each meeting. Self-monitoring will include comparison of board activity and discipline to governance process and board management delegation policies and the student outcomes focused governance framework. And then that we will discuss that quarterly. That is the framework by which we are working through to with next board. And so in my mind, it makes sense that this rubric is part of our self-evaluation process as well. So passing out copies of that, we don't have to discuss that right now, but just want the board to have that in hand for consideration at some point.
Just for point of clarification, so when you say the phrase, we'll monitor its process and performance for each meeting, and then we'll discuss this process and performance quarterly, is the expectation that we do something every 2 weeks, or still that we operate on the quarterly calendar?
I think that we operate on the quarterly calendar is what I'm thinking, but and that's,
I really hope so.
yeah, and I think that language has always been there, but we've interpreted it as while we're self-monitoring each meeting, we're formally monitoring as a board on a quarterly basis. So we should be keeping track of our meeting by meeting, right? I mean, that's how I've
right. I think
that.
I think we should evaluate and think about meeting by meeting, but not necessarily go through the process of formally evaluating each meeting, which is something that was a point of conversation a couple of years ago,
and I think we were in agreement on how that, and
All
how
right.
that is interpreted. Yeah.
Making sure.
Yep.
Is it only meetings, or is it also like work sessions and?
It's everything we do.
Okay.
All the business we conduct.
Because we do more than the meetings.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
I just wanted to raise up and I think some of these were my comments, and a lot of it is around the way that we do orientation for new board members, and I'm not sure if that's ever been recorded in like in a written down so that a new board chair, or because there could be a time when a majority of the board turns over, we elect a chair who would maybe never sat on the board. I don't foresee that happening probably in the near future, but it always could, and I think not having those things written down is a disservice to the board and the legacy of the work, the body of the work that we're all currently working on, of how do we impart knowledge when we lose people who have been on the board for 10 plus years, and ensuring that institutional, because there's value in institutional knowledge and knowing where we've been so that we can continue to drive our work forward. And so I don't know if that's a policy change, but I think that's something that the board should be conscious of, particularly as we head into the fall, and we've got 2 extra months to think about it because elections are happening in November instead of September.
Right.
So,
And I agree with you, and I think it's also about not reinventing the wheel every time. And I think, and that's something we can, yes, we have time to discuss, but I think it's something where, and I think you might have mentioned it, where our utilization of our board docs library and that software might be the
perhaps with our new staff person, we can also discuss other ways to house some of that between leadership, or if it's more of just like how you, I'm thinking more of the processes and how the work gets done, not necessarily like the products, which oftentimes are what the public sees. It's the processes of that were most effective for board members, that sometimes I think it's helpful to know what's worked for other people. So
Agreed.
I know I'm really old, but how about like instead of the bat phone, it's like the Cindy phone. In emergencies, we like dial it, and never mind. The audience doesn't get that.
Well, I'm laughing evilly, but anyway. Anybody else have anything to bring up on the self-evaluation document?
Right.
So I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we do generally take action to accept these. So that will be added to the next agenda as well, just probably to the consent motion to take action on accepting these results. And next is item F7, board work plan. Our board work plan further details work we've committed to do in fulfilling our governance duties with integrity. It's a standing agenda item as part of our accountability process that Kirsten will lead.
my board docs is sat so still that it logged me out, so I just had to log back in quick, so I'll open it back up. Maybe. I apologize for the delay.
Mine's up.
Okay. So I kind of went back to checking things off and plan to move them. We've added a few things with additional process around open enrollment, which isn't necessarily related to our preamble, but I think it fits that kind of how we message things to the board. And one thing, Cindy, I don't know if we've actually sent out to the board yet, but you and I had talked about it, I think, in agenda planning, about having the board look at our board belief statements and make sure that those were aligned with some of our new SMART goals and that they said what they wanted to do, because I think one thing that might be valuable, and I think we've kind of talked about this in a roundabout way, is to highlight some of those for the community around how we do our work and what our values and beliefs are as our work. And I think it's a great way to center our work at the beginning of a meeting, to just remind ourselves and the community what those beliefs are for how we do our work. So Cindy and I will be working together to send something out there. We're kind of past the due date that we had set for ourselves, but we will get that sent out to you shortly, just to relook at that. And then we can, and part of that would also be a conversation and just thinking about, is that something that we want to add that Cindy reads, or that as board members we take turns reading, which I think would be great, to take turns reading that, similar to how we do the consent motion, so that it is really that one voice that throughout 7 meetings the community would hear each of us say the board beliefs, and that we have that together.
And
so
having the person who does the consent motion, having that be their
their role that time,
that might be the way to do it. And then you're not always just hearing me, because I think I'm the teacher mom on Charlie Brown sometimes. So.
So I'm gonna set myself a due date of the end of the week to send that back out to you guys so that we can have a better, more informed conversation at our next meeting about it. Without any updates on, Terry did send out something on external monitoring, so if you haven't seen that, I will highlight that for my board colleagues to get that back to her so we can have a more informed discussion around external monitoring. Tom, I'm guessing we don't have any update on city council that we need to highlight, okay? Ongoing professional development, I think we're gonna table that till next meeting when Matt Smith can join us for our final conversation around the book, and then we'll be able to check that off as well. KPI reviews are ongoing. Community workshops, Cindy, do we have any update on that?
The only thing I've heard from Next Board, and I mentioned last time, they do have August 10th available, and they're holding that on their calendar until we confirm with them. The one thing that I had mentioned last time was that this is outside of the scope of the contract that we already have with them. It would be $3,000 to facilitate the August 10th session, which covers the workshop itself plus airfare and lodging. So that will be something that the board needs to decide if we want to expend that money.
When is I just have a question. When is the climate and culture? Is that at the same time or?
August 10th is a Saturday.
Okay. So it's not.
Yeah, so it'd be the
After
Monday
that?
and Tuesday, I believe, immediately following, yeah.
I just want to make sure we didn't, because I want to get it.
Overstep that.
Is that a conversation we should be having now? Should we have it in work session probably?
Yeah, I think a work session conversation, if that makes sense to everyone, because that wouldn't be, yeah.
Sorry, I'm just typing some notes here.
Thank you.
And then one thing that has not made it onto our work plan, but I would like to put on for us to work on this summer is to really dive into our treatment of employees and what kind of, have a work session around what it is we want in a conversation with Tom so that he understands, because I think at least the last 2 times I voted on that, we get to the vote and I get the sense of like, well, this is the report we have, so we have to kind of approve it based on the merits of what we had outlined for Tom, but it seems like we're always unhappy with what we had asked for, but we haven't really had a substantive conversation about that, about what it is that we really want as far as information. If I'm capturing that correctly?
I feel like we have had that conversation though, haven't we? Because we've made some adjustments.
Well, we changed policy, but we haven't talked about the monitoring piece and what we might want.
So what you're looking, what you would want the monitoring report to look like based on the new policy? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm thinking it might be of benefit to us to have a conversation about that as a board with Tom, to have a collaborative conversation.
I second that.
Might bring more clarity, maybe. Okay.
Fine with that.
Board consensus.
Okay.
So that's a work session. So we can talk about that.
We can talk about it in
Talk
agenda
about
planning
a
of when that
scheduling
might
that.
make sense.
Okay.
And then we've kind of hit the end of our work plan unless anyone has, except for our evaluation tool for our superintendent. Does that need to be assigned to a new compensation committee, Cindy, or what's our process for that?
So that was something, yeah, and that's probably something we need to talk about, but we had put the due date of 6/1 on there. One thing, I had worked on that a little bit, essentially using the tool, wow, nobody's moving in here. Using the tool that we had previously and updating it to include the new information since our last evaluation and SMART goals. It's okay. We can keep working in the dark.
Maybe it'll cool off.
So
Are you guys hot?
Sorry.
So, right, so anyway, what I had done thus far was update the tool from this previous time with new information since the last evaluation, with new expectations, and then also
To reflect our
to
conversation.
reflect the management limitations, monitoring reports for student outcomes, and then the SMART goals. So, I guess how to proceed with that, I'm not sure, because we did put a date of 6/1 on it, which, just for a future note, I was thinking about that, and we put the June the 1st on there when we didn't, I feel like we need to think in meeting dates versus
Just dates.
first date of the calendar, right, yeah. And I think we just wanted to make sure we had a deadline, but that didn't translate to a meeting date. So how do we want to proceed with that?
We're talking about evaluation tool for superintendent, correct?
Yeah.
Has it changed? I thought we just.
So essentially what it would be, I mean, I guess
It's
if we're
just the
not
board
changing it,
giving-
it's the same thing, just with the new information plus SMART goals added to the list of the policies, expectation policies, student expectation policies, management limitation policies, and then SMART goals, which are actually a subset of those
Student
things anyway,
expectations,
right?
yeah.
Does that make sense to everybody? That that's what it is? Okay. And I've shared that, and if you have any thoughts or feedback, then I guess I'll leave that to you to
Okay, yeah,
approach the board.
okay.
Okay. So is there anything else that I should be adding or for the summer for our work plan?
Did we ever get, we were working on the position description for Sharon's role times some extra things.
Yeah, we're planning, actually, we've been working on that. I think will be posted prior to the end of this week. And I don't think it'll be a long hiring timeline. I think we'll have a lot of interest in it.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. If no one has anything else, I will get that submitted to Sharon. I think what I'm just gonna do is send her exactly this with my notes, and then I'll have a goal of making it pretty so that I'm
that there's
meeting my
something there.
integrity that I need to at a better rate for Sharon,
Okay.
so.
Thank you, everyone. Next on the agenda are informational items for the board's review. G1, B8376, English readers K through 5. G2, high quality school building emergency operations plan. And G3, 2019 summer meal program. So those are for your review. And then we have items of privilege. Do any board members have comments to share? And I will turn it over to the superintendent.
Well, the school year is over, except for downtown school, which will happen, I believe, on the I don't remember, 23rd, I think it is. But prior to downtown school getting out, we will have, I think it's 10 classrooms of Head Start underway, I think beginning on the 19th. So we just keep going and going and going. I did send, I believe it was this past weekend, to the board a list of all the summer school programming that we have going on over the course of the summer. So as you can see, while people say the best thing about being a teacher is June, July, and August, that's really not accurate. If it ever were, it certainly isn't anymore. We really have things going on for students year-round. And that's something I think we can be particularly proud of. I also just want to give a shout out to all of our collective bargaining units and our team that negotiated. You see some of the team back there, Sheila Mason and Nick Lenhart. You don't see Tiffany back there, and Aaron is gone. But this was, all the changes to Chapter 20 have made this whole process very difficult. Change is difficult even good change is difficult. Not so good change is even more difficult. And so there was lots of uncertainty on the part of our collective bargaining units, as well as there was with our team, because it does complicate things. We're used to doing things a certain way. Everybody knows the lay of the land. We want to ultimately do the best that we can with the resources we have to serve our students. And I think if you look through each of the new agreements, the agreements do reflect just that. A good faith effort to stretch our dollars as far as we can, to treat our employees well and fairly, and continue to have competitive wages and benefits so that we can attract and retain the best staff to work with the most amazing students that you could find anywhere. So I want to thank the teams on both sides of the bargaining table for coming together and making this first go-round post the draconian changes to Chapter 20 a success. And that's all I have.
I have to adjourn because it's on the meeting, right? Rather than just taking a motion to go into closed session?
Yeah, I think we need to adjourn.
Yeah. Okay, I will adjourn the regular meeting. We'll have our closed session in